So I read that about 8,000 people are already using this at the moment. Is that correct?
Well, there's about 8,000 merchants where you can go and buy things directly with it. There's on a weekly basis about 100,000 people open up the Reserve app, and there's about 55,000 that we count as like substantially financially active, who are using it today. And to give you a sense of the total usage, I think it's around, I forget the exact numbers, but I think it's like $19 million in transactions per month by consumers and like 45 million in transactions per month via businesses. That's about the scale that we're at right now.
Yeah, and all of this money is entering circulation via dollars, right? At the moment, via these intermediaries.
Yeah, that's right. So it's like, somebody mints the stable coins, somebody mints the reserve tokens. Liquidity providers end up buying those reserve tokens and then sell them to end users and buy them back from end users.
Yeah, because if I can tie that a little bit to, for example, the case of Lebanon, which I did a video about, and so I know a little bit more about than Venezuela, because I think this is something where you also have Lebanon in mind as well, right? That would be an ideal use case.
Yep.
So one problem that they have, I think, so they're very close to hyperinflation, but that's being caused for a large part by them running a massive, long-term, very unsustainable current account or trade deficit, meaning that a lot of money is consistently sort of flowing out of that country, leading for their currency to crash. And then, what dollarization does is very valuable to some of the people in Lebanon. So I'm not going to criticize that, but I am going to point out a problem with it. And that is that money is leaving that country, including dollars. And I wonder how you see that, because I think, or how it seems to me, your system will help people get easier access to dollars, but it won't help with that problem that dollars are leaving the country. Do you see what I'm saying?
I think so, because it's like if people take their Lebanese pounds or lira, depending on your lingo, and they use those to buy dollars, in our system or in cash or what have you, that is, a reduction in demand for the local currency. Is that the main thing that you're talking about?
So what I'm talking about is just that people are spending all of the dollars they have on imports, and not all, of course, but a lot. So currency is leaving that country, and what I wanted to do is tie into a little bit the title of this video, or at least the description, where we compared it a little bit to the IMF, right? I said, oh, you're going to replace the IMF with this currency. Might have been a bit of an exaggeration. But one role that the IMF plays is the being a lender of last resort. So how that can help a country in a situation like this is that it puts money, a lot of money it brings to that country, and that might help it get off its back on its feet in a way, in the sense that it might use that to build an industry. And I think that your project might be extremely interesting, sort of for a bigger solution to hyperinflation in these countries, if it can build an element of something like that into it. What do you think of that?
It's an interesting idea. I mean, we certainly don't have any system to make large-scale loans to countries in distress like the IMF. It's a piece of infrastructure that could be used if the IMF or another lender wanted to. But in terms of having that capital to lend, there's we sort of currently don't have any way to do that. But it's an interesting idea. Like, are you seeing some way that are you imagining that capital would come from from people in the crypto world, or like how would you imagine that working?
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't see it coming from in the crypto world, because typically this is being done by governments, because private investors don't want to do that, because they're typically too small to turn it around, this can be a very profitable investment for a country, or an IMF, or is profitable, but only because they can do it on such a large scale.
Right.
But one thing that I was thinking would be interesting for you is if people could use collateral that is actually available to them, because then they could start minting their own reserve tokens in the country, if that makes sense. Do you see what I mean with that? So that they can create money inside the country rather than being reliant on dollars from outside the country, which are flowing out.
Right, totally. Yeah, and the challenge there is the tokenization. So if you can see how do I talk usefully about this? Like, let's say that a country had a bunch of gold and it wanted to make that more usable as a currency. Like as a side anecdote, there's like one region in Venezuela where little pieces of gold sometimes are used as currency because they sort of have so much of it floating around. But that's not, if you wanted to sort of take that asset and be like, okay, let's back a new currency with that, and let's use this technological system to do it, you would need some way to credibly tokenize it, to basically offer that, initial sort of similar to the US dollar stablecoins we've been discussing of like, okay, you bring us X amount of gold, we give you Y amount of tokens, and then you can always redeem them for the same rate. And so that could happen. The challenge there, I think, is often that if there's a country that's in so much distress that they're undergoing hyperinflation, often the institutions that that would have had the most credibility to issue to actually tokenize something and like provide that promise, people wouldn't necessarily trust them anymore. So people wouldn't necessarily trust government banks or even commercial banks necessarily to do that. Maybe they would. Maybe there's private institutions that would retain sufficient trust. But part of the way I've thought about it is that we're sort of, well, anyway, that's a more complicated thought. But so I can see where you're going with that. And I think it's a cool idea. I haven't really seen a way to do that yet, because it just tends to be that I think tokenization efforts in these countries would be less credible than things that are tokenized in some other place in Switzerland or the US or Singapore or some place that has trust in institutions when it comes to that redeemability.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's true. I mean, I know that's why it hasn't been done, because it's extremely difficult, right? But this is something when I read your protocol, I was thinking, okay, because especially since you are very big on decentralization, right? If a person could actually do that themselves in, for example, a smart contract, that I think would absolutely be transformative. But I know it's a pipe dream. If no, I know,
it's a super interesting idea. I've thought about like, could we somehow make it so that like anyone can kind of issue their own mini tokenized whatever, and then have something that's backed by all of that? That would be incredible. And then the challenge there is like because you can't really do the creditworthiness assessment on that massive scale. At least I don't know how to do that in a decentralized way. Then the only way I can imagine is like, well, if their balance was somehow over collateralized, but it's like, well, but if it's already over collateralized, then like, what's the point of them tokenizing the real world asset? They could just have something backed by whatever the on-chain collateral already is. So I think it is a pipe dream, but I think it's a useful pipe dream. And I try to tell the people on my team, something doesn't have to be a good plan for it to be a good idea. I think that's a good idea, even though I don't really see a way for it to work yet. And it's a good idea because it's like, it's worth thinking about. And maybe there's something in the area that can be figured out. And if so, that would be really cool.